This week I realized I don't know my timetables, so I'm going to read you a story I should have given more thought to. Hiya, this is Half-Baked Tales, where I write and read one halfway thought-through short story every week. They're not always good, but that's the point. Last week I pulled straight from the imagination with Half-Baked Tale number 23, The Scam of the Century, a Terminator-esque time travel story I dreamt up while sick with a cold. This week we're continuing on from Half-Baked Tale number 22 with First Steps Part 2. Part 1 introduced us to Jameson, a child with rare magical abilities, fleeing the impending doom of the city she calls home. I recommend going back and listening to Part 1, but it's equally as fun to go in blind. So here we go, Half-Baked Tale number 24, First Steps, Part 2. Silence isn't something Finnegan is familiar with, and he can't decide whether he likes it or not. In his head, he can conjure up the sounds of city streets, packed meeting rooms, and lodging houses. The closest he'd ever been to silence was the dead of night, but even then the shuffle of countless bodies in the barracks and the steady breathing of his older brother Raymond had filled his ears. The cottage, in comparison, is so quiet that Finnegan briefly wonders if his ears have stopped working altogether. He takes a few deep breaths, in through the nose and out through the mouth, the same way Raymond does when he's deep in sleep. This calms Finnegan down a bit. He has not gone deaf. He's just alone, and the cottage doesn't seem interested in keeping him company. The cottage is old, falling apart, and just how Raymond described it. Hopefully that means Raymond will be along soon to join him. If Finnegan could find this place based on a crude map drawn in the dirt, then surely Raymond can find his way here. Once he arrives, the two of them can hide together, and the world won't be so silent anymore. But Finnegan is cursed with a logical mind. He's been hiding in the cottage for 2 days. Raymond had promised to leave just a couple hours after sending Finnegan away from the lodging the headquarters had set them up in. The silence grows louder as Finnegan attempts to think about anything else. Raymond said he's coming. Raymond will come. What will Finnegan do if he doesn't? Finnegan was raised to be the second half to Raymond's tricksy duo. He's learned to bounce off Raymond's plans. They have an impeccable silent communication outmatched by none. Being separated from his brother is like being without a necessary limb. Finnegan's vision starts to blur up with tears, and he allows them to fall down his face. Raymond never lets him cry. In their duo, Finnegan is the strong one, despite being 10 years Raymond's junior. He calls it their united front, and together they offer magical services to prosperous gangs, organizations, and families in the city in exchange for lodging and protection. Finnegan plays the role of stoic, magical prodigy, while Raymond acts as his keeper and, more importantly, the leverage to stand between Finnegan's magic and their employer should anything go wrong. Magic is forbidden in the city, but it has become a very helpful and rare tool for dissenting groups in the war, creating a high demand for Finnegan's skill. Their latest and most beneficial target so far has been a large and well-organized gang who have been taking advantage of the civil unrest to garner more influence for themselves. An extremely strong magical prodigy gives them clout not many organizations can boast. So Finnegan learns and practices his craft, and Raymond peddles their services for food and protection. But the war has been getting worse, and the intel Raymond had overheard 2 days ago assured them that they needed to adapt their strategy. The war is going to get worse, much worse. That's all Finnegan knows, and that's all Raymond would tell him. Their only chance of survival is to get out and hide, both from the devastation of war and the people who would be expecting their services. Finnegan is safe now. Is Raymond? The cottage is unlike anywhere Finnegan has ever stayed before. He has so much space to himself, and he can explore without wondering if a hand will reach out to smack him. Exploring was the very first thing he did. He needed to find some food. The cabinets were mostly empty. He had used a few spells to remove mold off of some crusty bread, but never had he dreamt of finding such a delicacy. Tea. He had heated up some water, bobbed the tea into a cup, and was just inhaling the warm scents when his senses snapped to attention. There is someone powerful at the door, someone much more powerful than Raymond. The fear bubbling in his stomach is tantalizing to him. Raymond's not here to jump into action. The option to curl in, crawl under the table, and plug his ears seems readily available. Somehow, though, the essence of his big brother fights its way to the top of Finnegan's mind. He swallows his fear, dons the front that got them out of many scrapes and puts full-grown adults to shame, and moves with precision to the door. He opens it directly, daring the person waiting to encroach upon his and his brother's plan. It is a child, probably a girl. She's as tall as him, dressed for traveling like many of the families in the city do. She's covered in cinder. Finnegan inwardly flinches at the sight. She must have stumbled directly out of the city. He wondered if she might be a fire hazard. She's alone. All of these facts do not add up in Finnegan's mind, and he maintains his composure as he accepts the most important fact of all. The girl has a powerful, magical essence. That must be what he detected when sitting with his tea. It was seeping off of her. Finnegan had met only 1 or 2 people with magical abilities, but never one with the level of power he detected in her. Where on earth did she come from? The girl at this abandoned door leading to his hideout well without the city. A hideout meant for Finnegan and his brother. Brimming with power he associated with himself alone. Was this part of Raymond's plan? Had he found someone to team up with? Another child seemed unlikely and an unhelpful choice. Raymond had always kept them away from other magical people. Being associated with magical groups made you a target. It was safer to take refuge amongst powerful people, even if they wanted to imbue the magic that set Finnegan apart. Raymond could not have sent her here. For some reason, the sight of her confirms Finnegan's suspicion. Raymond would not be joining him. All alone, with no idea what to do, faced with someone so familiar and entirely stranger, he's caught between wondering what she's doing here and whether she would stay. Finnegan had divided the precious tea he'd found between 2 mugs. The heat spread between the 2 vessels, creating a cozy bubble enclosing the table the 2 children sat before. Jameson's ash-covered fingers gripped the warmth of her cup. Finnegan hovered his face over the steam, and they talked. For 2 children their age, set to drift alone at the end of their world, barely could they comprehend their situation, let alone begin to process their experience amongst it. Silence had been a necessity for each for so long. Finally, they released the grip on their words and told each other everything. Once no words were left, and the evisceration of their steam-clouded warmth forced comfort away, they sat with a new realization. Jameson's family had sent her running. Finnegan's brother knew something was coming. They needed to act. Jameson stared across the table and sought out that rattling presence she had sensed in Finnegan from the first. It was a presence she was all too familiar with. She'd been surrounded by it her whole life. In her brief years trailing her family members round city streets, the only other folk they'd paid any mind to and not hide from were those with the same presence. Finnegan, on the other hand, had spent his life as the sole magical entity in a terrifying world of a different sort of power altogether. He should, by the manner he had been living, avoid all other magical ties. Jameson's magical presence, which he'd sensed the very moment he'd stopped dunking his tea bag, would be a threat on a normal day. But Raymond had sent him down a new path, and Finnegan felt that Jameson was part of his brother's new plan. So together, they recognized the power within each other and let their barriers down. Just hours before dusk, before the impending destruction of the city they once called their homes, Jameson and Finnegan concocted a plan. That was Half-Baked Tale number 24, First Steps, Part 2. Again, if you haven't already, go back and listen to Part 1 to follow Jameson's arrival at the cottage and her first impressions of Finnegan. I'm glad I was able to dive back into Jameson and Finnegan's story. Last week I was bombarded with brain fog and could not be bothered devising a second draft of anything. I'm sure any other creative can relate. It's sometimes so much easier to dish out some nonsense than to refine something that already exists. But that really does depend on your creative mood, because sometimes there is just not a single unique thought in my head, and that's when I get my chisel out and start refining stories in progress. Jameson and Finnegan's story has been in process since I was around 10 years old, when I was a standard artistic kid locked away in my bedroom, coming up with stories. I wrote a draft of what I could remember from that for the beginning of the Half-Baked series back in October. That was Half-Baked Tale number 3. So First Steps, Part 1 and 2 are on their second drafts, and they are already dying for a third. First thing to mention is I tacked on the ending literally right before recording. So if you notice a confusing shift in past versus present tense or an underwhelming oversimplification of plot, that's why. I write the Half-Baked stories and post them to Substack on Fridays, and then I record the podcast over the weekend and share it on Tuesdays. So the first few paragraphs at the end, right after Part 2 switches from strictly Finnegan's perspective, is extremely fresh, like just written. After my writing session on Friday, I figured out how I want First Steps to end, but I just didn't have the time to get it written. I only have a certain amount of time that I dedicate to writing for this series each week. But this weekend, instead of prepping the podcast like usual, I just kept writing the end of the story. But it's still not even half-baked. It's like quarter-baked. It's very underdone. So what I've done is rounded out Part 2 to set myself up for a resounding Part 3. Now there's two possibilities for what will come next for First Steps. Either a rudimentary Part 3 to flesh out ideas, or a longer podcast with a full third draft of First Steps in its entirety. If you've been listening to the podcast, let me know if a longer story is something you'd be interested in, or if you prefer them bite-sized. Now let's look at the changes from Draft 1 to Draft 2. Biggest change is Finnegan's backstory. I originally had him coming from the same sort of magical family as Jameson, but I thought that was a bit of a weak choice. Gotta switch it up, can't have just two of the same characters. So instead, I'm working on him having basically joined the mob in this fictional world, offering his abilities to their services in exchange for protection. I'm wanting to establish the rarity of magic in this world, and the abuse of something rare is a pretty natural human response. This also gives Finnegan a little distance. I want him to want to move forward and find something new. I also got to introduce Finnegan's brother into the narrative. This is a change from his only family member having been his mother. I wanted a mix of a parent and partner in crime relationship, so an older sibling seemed more fitting. I'd like to pepper in a bit more information about Raymond and how he shaped Finnegan. I'd also really like for him to bend some gender stereotypes. I'm very wary of sitting into the heteronormative aspects that my 10-year-old imagination created, though I still want to stay true to Little Me's concept. A big change that I want to make in Draft 3 is the dripping amount of exposition. I'd rather this information flow naturally from Finnegan's conversation with Jameson, let the reader get their own opinion on who Finnegan is based on his actions instead of all this prescribed information. But I just had to get it all down on paper, so sometimes you gotta let the exposition be heavy. As ever, thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving it a review or sharing it with a friend. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next week.